On a quiet spring afternoon in May 2012, 17-year-old Jonathan Reese made a frantic 911 call from his suburban home in Bloomington. His voice trembled as he whispered into the phone, casting nervous glances toward the hallway. "Please, you have to help me," he pleaded, his voice barely audible. "My grandmother has a gun. She's threatening me." The 911 operator tried to keep him on the line, but the call ended abruptly with what sounded like a door opening, followed by Jonathan's sharp intake of breath. Within minutes, police cruisers converged on the modest two-story house on Maple Street, their sirens piercing the otherwise peaceful neighborhood. When officers entered the home, they found Jonathan's body in the living room, blood pooling beneath him on the beige carpet. 3 gunshot wounds marked his chest. His smartphone lay just beyond his outstretched hand. Martha Klein, 74, sat rigidly in an armchair across the room, a .38 revolver resting on the side table next to her. Her hands were folded in her lap, her expression eerily calm. "He was going to hurt me," she told the first officer on the scene, her voice steady despite the horror surrounding her. "I had no choice. It was self-defense." Detective Alex Mercer arrived 20 minutes later. At 42, he'd investigated dozens of homicides during his 15 years with the Bloomington Police Department, but something about this one immediately struck him as unusual. The living room showed no signs of a struggle. No overturned furniture, no broken items. Nothing to suggest Jonathan had posed any threat to the elderly woman who now claimed she feared for her life. More troubling still, officers found no weapon near Jonathan's body. The teenager had been unarmed when his grandmother shot him. "Ms. Klein," Mercer said, approaching the woman who remained seated in the armchair. "I need to ask you some questions about what happened here." Martha looked up at him with clear blue eyes that betrayed no emotion. "He was becoming dangerous," she said simply. "I did what I had to do." When Mercer pressed for details about the alleged threat, Martha's story began to shift subtly. First, she claimed Jonathan had approached her with raised fists. Then, that he had threatened to kill her in her sleep. Finally, that he had been stealing her medication and selling it to friends. "He was out of control," she insisted, her fingers lacing and unlacing in her lap. "No one would listen to me. No one understood what he was capable of." As the crime scene techs processed the house, Mercer stepped outside to speak with the neighbors. Mrs. Wilson from next door shook her head sadly when asked about Jonathan. "Such a quiet boy," she said, peering over at the house where police officers now strung yellow tape. "Always polite when I saw him. Helped me with my groceries just yesterday." "What about his relationship with his grandmother?" Mercer asked. Mrs. Wilson hesitated. "She was strict. Very old-fashioned. I heard them arguing sometimes, but what family doesn't?" She paused, then added more softly, though lately, it seemed more frequent. "Just last week, I heard her shouting at him for coming home after curfew. Called him ungrateful, said he was just like his mother." Jonathan's parents, Mercer learned, were not in the picture. His father had died in a car accident when Jonathan was just 5. His mother, Martha's daughter, had struggled with addiction for years before losing custody when Jonathan was 11. Martha had raised him since then. Back at the station, Mercer sifted through Martha's statement with growing skepticism. Something wasn't adding up. He requested a warrant to search Jonathan's phone and bedroom. The next day, what he found painted a troubling picture, not of a dangerous teenager, but of a young man desperately trying to break free from his grandmother's control. In Jonathan's journal, entries detailed Martha's increasingly restrictive rules. She monitored his text messages, tracked his whereabouts with a GPS app, and had recently forbidden him from applying to colleges more than 50 miles from home. "She threw away my UCLA acceptance letter," read one entry from just 2 weeks prior. "Said I wasn't ready to be on my own, that I needed her guidance. When I tried to argue, she took my car keys and said I'd lost privileges for the month. I can't live like this anymore." The phone records were even more revealing. Jonathan had been researching legal emancipation for minors. He'd contacted a youth advocacy group and had an appointment scheduled for the following week. Most damning of all, he'd recorded several of Martha's tirades, including one where she threatened to do whatever it takes to keep him from leaving. When confronted with this evidence, Martha's calm facade finally cracked. "You don't understand," she said, her voice rising. "His mother was just like him at that age, thought she knew everything, couldn't wait to get away from me. Look what happened to her. I couldn't let Jonathan make the same mistakes. He needed structure, discipline. So you shot him 3 times?" Mercer asked quietly. Martha's eyes hardened. "He was on the phone that day, whispering. I knew he was plotting something. When I confronted him, he said he was leaving for good, that I couldn't stop him. He said he'd found out about his trust fund." This was new information. Mercer made a note to follow up. "What trust fund?" he asked. Martha looked away. "His father's life insurance. It was substantial. Jonathan wasn't supposed to know about it until he turned 21, but somehow he found out. He accused me of keeping it from him so he'd remain dependent on me." "And was that true, Ms. Klein?" She didn't answer directly. "Everything I did was to protect him." The district attorney charged Martha with second-degree murder. As the case moved toward trial, Mercer continued investigating, piecing together the complex dynamics that had led to tragedy. He interviewed Jonathan's teachers, who described a bright, ambitious student who had grown increasingly withdrawn in recent months. His guidance counselor revealed that Jonathan had confided his fears about his grandmother's mental health. He was worried about her, the counselor said. Said she'd been getting more paranoid, convinced that everyone was trying to take advantage of her, including Jonathan. But he also said she refused to see a doctor. The school nurse had similar concerns. Jonathan came to me in April asking about signs of dementia. He mentioned his grandmother had been hiding valuables around the house, accusing him of stealing things that she'd misplaced herself. Most revealing was Mercer's conversation with Martha's sister, Eleanor, who lived 2 states away. "Martha was always controlling, even when we were children," Eleanor explained during a video call. "She needed everything just so. But after her daughter's struggles, something changed in her. She became obsessed with the idea that she could fix everything, control everything. When she got custody of Jonathan, she swore she wouldn't make the same mistakes she made with her daughter." "What mistakes?" Mercer asked. "Letting her grow up," Eleanor said sadly. "Letting her become independent." As the trial approached, Martha's defense team argued for diminished capacity, citing undiagnosed dementia. They painted Jonathan as a troubled teen who had provoked his vulnerable grandmother. But the prosecution methodically dismantled this narrative, presenting evidence of Martha's lucidity and calculation. The trust fund proved particularly damning. Financial records showed Martha had been serving as trustee and had made several questionable loans to herself from the account. If Jonathan had gained independence, especially legal emancipation, a court-appointed trustee would have likely taken over. Martha took the stand in her own defense, still insisting she had acted out of fear. "He was going to abandon me, just like his mother did," she testified, tears finally breaking through her composure. "I gave him everything, and he was going to leave me with nothing." The jury deliberated for just 6 hours before returning a guilty verdict on the charge of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced Martha to 22 years in prison, noting the particular betrayal inherent in her crime. "You were entrusted with the care and nurturing of your grandson," the judge said during sentencing. "Instead, you chose to end his life rather than allow him the independence every young person deserves." As Martha was led away, Mercer remained troubled by the case. He thought about the subtle warning signs that had been missed, the isolation that had allowed Martha's control to go unchecked for years, the systems that had failed both grandmother and grandson. In the evidence room, Jonathan's phone still held the 911 call that had been his final act. Mercer had listened to it dozens of times during the investigation, but something about it continued to haunt him. "She has a gun," Jonathan had whispered. "Not, she's going to shoot me or, she's trying to kill me. Just, she has a gun." Had he known what was about to happen? Had he sensed the depth of his grandmother's desperation? Or had he simply been afraid, reaching out for help without understanding how quickly everything would unravel? The case file was officially closed, but these questions lingered. Mercer knew that behind closed doors, countless families harbored their own complex webs of control, dependence, and unspoken resentments. How many were one confrontation away from their own tragedy? In his final report, Mercer included a recommendation for increased attention to elder mental health services and better support for kinship caregivers like Martha, grandparents and other relatives raising children not their own. Perhaps it wouldn't have saved Jonathan, but it might help prevent another family from fracturing so irrevocably. 3 months after the trial, Mercer received a letter from Martha Klein. The envelope was thin, containing just a single sheet of prison stationery. "Detective," it read, "there are things I didn't say at the trial. Things about Jonathan's father, about the accident that wasn't really an accident. About promises I made. Some secrets should stay buried, but they never do. They surface, generation after generation. I thought I could break the cycle. I was wrong." The letter was unsigned, but Mercer recognized the handwriting. He filed it as a supplemental document to the case, knowing he might never fully understand the depths of trauma and secrets that had culminated in that quiet living room on a spring afternoon. What truly drives someone to destroy what they claim to love most? Is it fear, control, mental illness, or something darker still, passed down like a terrible inheritance? And how fine is the line between protection and possession, between love and control? Martha Klein would serve her sentence, but these questions remained unanswered, echoing through the halls of justice and the quieter corridors of family homes everywhere. Sometimes, Mercer reflected, the most dangerous threats aren't strangers in dark alleys, but the slow poison of manipulation disguised as care, of control masquerading as protection. And sometimes, the most tragic victims are those who almost escape.